Hi, Greece and Rome people. I'm going to respond to an email I got from a student named Tiffany that I think warrants addressing all of you, and I hope that you will find it interesting. It's important to understand that the myths that are told in the various books by, for example, Edith Hamilton, whose book is the gold standard for these sorts of tellings of the myths, tend not to come from sources that still exist, that are still what's called extant. And that can be problematic, can it? Especially when you have various retellings of stories, not only today, but also in the ancient world. So how do you deal with these kinds of things? Well, let me get a little bit specific here. When it comes to particular gods and goddesses and heroes and heroines, it depends on which ones you're talking about as to how close we can get to the root of what the ancient Greeks really thought about these personages. For example, when it comes to Zeus, Hera, and the rest of the Olympians, we rely almost exclusively on Hesiod and his theogony. It's certainly the most authoritative account of where the universe came from, where the entities of the universe came from, where the Olympians came from, and how Zeus came to be the king of the gods on Mount Olympus over the course of a tripartite progression from Uranus to Cronus to Zeus. I highly encourage everyone to read the Theogony. It's not that long. It's in the same hexameter meter as Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are, and Hesiod was supposedly contemporary with Homer, so that there's even a probably apocryphal, which means full of it, story that Homer and Hesiod competed with each other in a poetry contest. So there is at least that myth of them having lived at the same time. So for the gods and the goddesses, we have no problem. We read Hesiod, and there are plenty of accounts in the ancient world and in our more modern world that deal with the gods and goddesses, where they came from, where the universe came from, etc., in various ways, in various retellings. It's when we get to the heroes that things get really tricky when it comes to being able to pinpoint exactly which sources we can rely on for the story of a given hero or heroine. And that's mainly what I want to address here. We'll start with Perseus, the first of the four greatest pre-Homeric heroes. You have Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, and Jason. There's only one out of four of those heroes, I'm not going to tell you which yet, that we have a specific source for that is as authoritative as, for example, the Homeric epics are for Achilles and Odysseus, and the theogony of Hesiod is for the universe, the gods, and the goddesses. How do we know about Perseus? We don't know how we know about Perseus. Perseus may or may not have been, or at least inspired by, someone who was actually a historical figure. So we call him a hero, but when we want to say where it is we first learn about Perseus, we can't. We have to depend upon various later retellings, and various later retellings of these retellings. And so who we can depend on for the story about Perseus, please understand that there is no one source we can rely on. The first sources that we draw from come from far after Perseus himself was supposed to have lived. And this is the case for Heracles as well, and for Theseus. It's only Jason that we have a source from around the time, could be a little confusing, listen carefully, around the time that these first three heroes were epitomized in various encyclopedic treatments of their stories that we can rely on now as retellings of sources that no longer exist. In that same period, in the Hellenistic period, the third and final period of ancient Greek history, we have an actual epic from one of the librarians of the Library at Alexandria. Apollonius Rhodius, Apollonius of Rhodes. It's called the Argonautica, and it deals, as the title implies, with the voyage of the Argonauts, Jason at the head of it, with Heracles and Theseus tagging along, kind of drawing together those second, third, and fourth of the most important pre-Homeric heroes. And so the Argonautica is a source that we can read and say, this is the Jason story, and yet there are other sources preceding the Argonautica, hundreds of years earlier, in fact, that we also find Jason doing things within, such as, perhaps most famously, in the Medea. Medea kills her and his children to get back at him for various injustices he's done toward her. And so we get a sense of who Jason may or may not have been with respect to what it means to be a hero in the Medea of Euripides in the 5th century BC. But that's a couple hundred years before the Argonautica in the 3rd century BC, which gets across a completely different sense of who Jason was as a hero. In fact, even questions the very notion that he was a hero in the sense that we mean hero when we use the term today. And that's one of the most interesting aspects of Jason that you're going to come across in the video that you're going to watch centered on Jason, and the chapter from Before You Read Homer that you're going to read that complements that video.